This was the 11th round, played April 10th, 1960. Bobby against Carlos Incutto. I don't really know much about Carlos other than he was from Argentina and he was born on July 15th, 1925. He passed away April 26th in the year 2000, and that's all I really know about him. Bobby with e4, of course. We get e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we're going to see a Spanish game, a Ray Lopez opening, bishop b5. We get Morphy's defense, that's Paul Morphy in case you're wondering, with pawn a6. The Columbus variation with bishop a4. Now knight f6, kingside castles, and bishop e7 is the closed Spanish. Here rook e1, now pawn b5, bishop b3, pawn d6, pawn c3, kingside castles, pawn h3 is Palkeres's variation. Palkeres, the great Estonian chess player who never quite made world champion. Here knight a5 and bishop to c2, pawn c5. We get pawn d4 and Chigorin's defense with queen c7. Chigorin, the world championship challenger against Steinitz after Zuckertort, Mikhail Chigorin. We get the queen's knight to d2 here. C takes the d4, c takes d4. Now bishop b7. This is Vasily Panov's system. Bishop b7 is. Knight comes to the f1. The queen's rook comes to c8. That battery attacks the bishop on c2. So he has to move to d3. And now Incutto leaves the more commonly played line and plays knight to d7. And that gets the question mark. d5 being called for, and that is the most commonly played move, pawn d5. That's going to be answered by d takes e5, knight takes e4, knight g3, pawn f5. That pawn is captured en passant, and then bishop takes f6. So that's the most commonly played line. Back here, Carlos with the knight to d7, invoking the wrath of the annotator. Knight e3 is the most frequently played move in spite of the disdain of the bot. Here e takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop f6. It's a pretty equal position. The eval bar at about 0.6. Again, if it's less than 1 or greater than -1, that's pretty much equal at the top levels of chess. Here knight d to f5, pawn g6, hits the knight, knight h6 check, king h8. Now the knight on e3 comes to g4, opening the c1 h6 diagonal. Bishop g7, now bishop g5. So that gets a question mark with bishop f4 being suggested as a better square, but Bobby with bishop g5, perhaps wanting to provoke some weakness in the camp. Knight e5 was played, and yeah, you gotta wonder, why not take the pawn and then follow up with f6? Bishop takes b2, hits the rook. The rook would have to come to b1. And then you could actually follow with f6 because you don't care if rook takes bishop because your pawn is attacking my bishop. So I'm not sure why Carlos Incutto rejected that, but he played knight e5 here. Bobby plays knight takes knight. Again, I prefer to go after the bigger fish. Bobby with knight takes knight gets the big red X. Knight f6 being, really, knight f6 being called for. I didn't consider knight f6. My idea was rook c1 attacking the queen. I do get a star for that because he's going to have to block. Probably best to block with this bad knight. The knight on the rim is dim, so get that back in. And then after knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and maybe I can break things up with a4. What's it think? A star. I did not consider knight f6 here. That's an interesting... Is that what it said? Knight f6, right? It did. Huh, I did not consider that move, but it locks everything in place, I guess. Everything's locked into place. And what would black play here? He still wants to get this knight back into the game, so maybe knight c4. He might want to put the question to this knight on f6, so maybe knight d7. It constricts the whole black king side, doesn't it? Locks everything in place. Well, let's go back. Bobby played knight takes the knight on e5. Pawn takes the knight. Now pawn a4 is played. Looking to open the a file. Marked inaccurate, and rook c1 still the best choice. I mentioned this earlier when it recommended knight f6. Well, now the bot is recommending rook c1. Force the queen off of the c file. And then you could trade the rook off. And I don't know whether it would be better to take with the bishop or the rook. It feels like this rook has to maintain this presence, doesn't it? So yeah, the bishop for sure. And then we can open the d file perhaps. Just retreat your bishop out of the way. Get a thumbs up for that. It prefers bishop e2, but you get the point. All right, so a4, knight c4 marked inaccurate with f6 being called for. Yeah, play that first. Play f6 first and then knight c4, because this bishop has to move. And when he comes to e3, now knight c4 puts another question out there. Actually puts two questions out there because the b-man is undefended. Ironically, if you defend this, I might still take this, because after takes, this knight is no longer defended. The bishop was overworked. That looks pretty good. So f6 first. Instead, knight c4 was played by Carlos, and now we have queen e2. Now pawn f6, bishop c1, knight a5 played here. A takes b5, a takes b5, knight b3 looking pretty interesting. Bishop e3 here, and knight b3 is played. Only hitting one piece this time, but still quite a good move. And this actually keeps either rook from coming to c1. So rook a7, getting in line with the queen. Now knight d4 hits the queen. Queen g4. So just take the knight is the better choice. It's more active. You could probably play queen d2 straight away here, but my thoughts are bishop takes, pawn takes, and then queen d2. But you may be able to play queen d2 right away. Let's see what it thinks. That gets a check mark. Bobby with queen g4 here. Now rook a8, marked inaccurate. Queen b6 being called for. I actually think that perhaps getting on this line would be appropriate. And that threatens a discovered attack, doesn't it? I get a check mark, and the idea is I'm threatening knight c6, which hits the rook and the undefended bishop. So I feel like I'm winning something there. Instead, rook a8 was played. Rook takes the rook, and bishop takes the rook. And I think you could take with the rook as well over here. The queen covering f7. This is probably fine. Gets a check mark, although rook c1 forces bishop c6. Bishop takes the rook was played by Carlos Incutto. Rook c1 is still played nonetheless. White has quite good play going on here. Queen d6. Oh boy, I don't know if I'd put my queen there. But where else? You don't really have any good choices. And it's not like I can play knight f7 anyway. Rook c8 though attempts to decoy the rook. Please take my rook and I'll win your queen. In fact, I'm threatening knight f7 now, whether you move the rook or not, because your rook is pinned. Oh boy, that's a beauty. I can now play knight f7, and you can't take it with your rook. For that reason, he played queen e7 to prevent knight f7. Right, let's just do a careless move and point out that knight f7 can now be played because the rook cannot take the knight because the rook is pinned. What a strong attack by Bobby Fischer. So he played queen e7 to prevent knight f7, and now the x-ray defense on a8 from this rook is valid. So bishop takes b5 was played here, and now the bishop wants to come back to c4, again defending knight f7. But now that this rook has done its job, he can probably just retreat back. Yeah, I get a star. Anyway, bishop takes b5 was played. Bishop takes e4. Big red X. f5 attacking the queen being called for. So if we play f5 here, he takes f5. And if bishop takes the knight, I'm going to play bishop takes the bishop. Hangs the rook, right? Not so fast. It decoys the rook so that this discovered attack, and the queen has to move somewhere. If you play queen c7, then I'm playing f7, and I'm one square away from promotion. If you play queen e6, that's probably what you have to play, defended by your knight. I may be able to play this doozy, x-ray fork. That's a great move. I get an exclam for that. Hitting the queen, hitting the rook, but defended by my queen. I like that move. That forces him to trade queens. I'm going to leave my bishop right there. I'll take with the pawn. Let's go back. Incutto with bishop takes pawn on e4. That's answered by the aforementioned bishop c4. And I think you can trade rooks here also. This is probably fine. Get a thumbs up. And then play bishop c4. It's the same thing. It's just different. But Bobby with bishop c4 right away. Pawn f5 now. Queen g5. That's questioned with rook takes f8. In fact, the eval bar swung a splinter in black's favor here. Right, so take the rook with queen h4 or queen g5 to follow depending on what black does. He's got to take with one or the other. And if bishop takes, then queen g5. And if queen takes, then queen h4. One of these two. So let's put both up there. Let's start with bishop takes. And then on bishop takes, I'm going to play queen g5. And after this trade, I am not going to take with my bishop. I'm going to play the knight f7. Check. And then on king g7, now I will take with my bishop. Or my knight. It's probably better to take with the knight, to be honest. Oh, thumbs up says take with the bishop. All right, take with the bishop. I should have stuck with my first instinct, even though the eval bar preferred knight takes. Look, the eval bar has this at 0.3. And has this at 1.1. So the eval bar and the annotation bot don't agree in this position. And that's why I call it fickle bot. Now, in the other case, though, if he takes with a queen, I'm going to play queen h4 since he's not covering there anymore. And if bishop f6 hitting my queen, bishop g5 interposes, and I end up with this position. Okay, back. Bobby with queen g5. Apparently that should allow black to equalize. Oh, because he's got knight f3. Wow, that's slick. He didn't play knight f3, though. He played bishop f6. This should be a brilliancy. So the threat is, of course, we've got all this hit on the queen, and so life is pretty bright for black here, right? So if I take the knight, it's all I can do because I'm in check. Well, now queen takes queen comes with check, and on bishop takes queen, now this rook can be captured. Not a good situation, right? What, can I do anything here? I can force the king in line with my bishop and then take the pawn with discovered check defending my bishop, although he may give up the rook for the bishop. Since he has a material advantage, he can give some material back. I get a star for that. And these two bishops working together are quite strong. I could defend, but this pawn is still hanging as well. Yeah. But the bot is giving a splinter's edge to black. It should be drawn from here if played correctly. Let's go back. Bishop f6 from Carlos Incutto, missing his opportunity to save the half point. Knight f7 check is now played. And king g8. And the bot actually calling for queen takes the knight. Interesting. The bot says pick up the minors and the rook. So here, and I take, oh, and you get my queen. Actually, here. That's why. Okay, now it makes sense. Although the eval bar still gives a decisive advantage to white, so it doesn't much matter. Queen takes f7 is refuted. I'm actually taking this with check. And just don't play bishop takes g5 here. You know, save your rook. I get an exclam. And then we're good. So anyway, king g8 doesn't matter. He's lost either way. It's just, again, a matter of time. Knight takes the pawn check by discovery. Knight e6. Knight takes the G-man. Oh, boy. Rip open the king's position. And so we've got the threat of bishop takes the knight here. We've got the hit on the queen here. We've got the super attack on the rook here. Wow. He played bishop takes queen. Knight takes queen is check. Bishop takes knight. Bishop h6 saying take my rook because I'm going to get you in a crisscross. Double exclam for Bobby Fischer. And here's the point. Rook takes rook is answered by a fork. Check. And you're forced into the corner where you're gonna be a goner. And now bishop takes the rook. And I'm up 2 pawns going into the endgame. 2 bishops against 2 bishops. But a 2-pawn advantage for white, one of which is a passed pawn. So it should be a matter of time. He tries bishop f6, coordinating his bishops. Pawn b4, bishop d4, pawn b5, bishop d3, bishop d7 defends, king g8, bishop e8. Keeping the king from escaping. That's slick. That king is contained in this little box here. That was a slick move. Bishop c4 right here. G3. Bishop back to d3. Bishop e3. Says I'm going to give you some room to breathe. X-ray defending b6. For that reason, bishop takes bishop. Pawn takes bishop. And he doesn't have time to do anything. King f8 does hit the bishop. He ignores it. What a move. Please take my bishop, because if you take my bishop, b7, and you can't stop b8 queens. This deserves more than a star. What a beautiful move. Bishop e4 covers b7. So bishop d7, king e7. Now bishop takes the pawn, overworking the bishop. Ho ho! Black resigns. What a move. Black resigns. You cannot take my bishop because I push and I'm promoting. Glorious. On the other hand, if you try to maintain a presence on the h1 a8 diagonal, I'll pick up this pawn first, and now I've got 4 pawns, and your bishop just is completely overworked. Sooner or later, I'm going to tax you too far. March this one up even, make you take it with your bishop, and as soon as you do, I'll push the other one. Glorious. Glorious, glorious. What a great way to finish that game. All right, let's look at the numbers on this one and see what they tell us. An accuracy of 94.6 by Bobby Fischer, a single game rating of 2,900. Every game, 2,800, 2,900, 3,000 every game, including a brilliancy and a couple of moves that I thought should have also been brilliancies in this.